All right, I think we are live. Good afternoon, everybody. Chuck Holton coming to you from Panama City, Panama. It's a beautiful day in the rainy season. Yesterday, I got the chance to go deep sea fishing for the day. That's why we didn't have a live. And I caught a whole mess of mahi-mahi, and they're delicious. We made ceviche. We're going to be having a lot of fish steaks at my house coming up here pretty soon. Do me a favor and post in the chat where you're coming in from. Let us know where you're watching. And if you, South Africa, Tunisia, Las Vegas. No, we were out actually fishing for tuna, but we didn't catch any tuna. We only caught mahi mahi, mahi mahi. And but that's beautiful fish. It's a lot of fun. We spent the whole day out on the water, and so it was tiring, but it was a great day. Okay, we're going to talk about the Selfie Flotilla, which was just captured by Israeli forces as they tried to enter Gaza. And I sort of debated whether or not to even cover this topic because I kind of don't want to give these people any oxygen. You know what I mean? They're just so ridiculous. Uh, I'm going to show you how you can prove mathematically that these people don't care anything about the people of Gaza. They just hate Israel. And so this was all purpose built and designed to make to give Israel a dilemma where they're going to be embarrassed no matter what happens. And that's pretty much what happened. So we're going to talk about that. And then if we have time at the end, I'll talk a little bit about President Trump's executive order that sort of threw Israel under the bus. And so we'll kind of delve into that a little bit. If you have questions, do me a favor, put them in the chat in all caps, and our moderators can go in and collect them up, put them in a document for me that I'll get to at the end, and I'll answer all your questions at the end of today's live. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and let's get into it. But before we do that, I just wanted to point something out here that we're talking about all this craziness in Russia and Ukraine. And I need to do a separate live on this. So put in the chat if you want me to do another live on it, because what we're seeing are massive preparations for war with Russia by NATO countries, including the United States. We've got countries in Europe that are putting their troops on alert. We've got the United States sending fuel tankers over to, and fighter jets and stuff over to Europe. And things may be about to get hot between NATO and Russia. Apparently, at least that's what the Pentagon is training for. So it's no wonder that nation states are joining the stampede into gold. Now, gold just ripped past $3,800 an ounce. So it's up almost 50% this year. That's unprecedented. And your dollars, of course, are busy shrinking in value as the guys in Washington are firing up the money printers like it's a hobby. And we're supposed to just pretend that's all fine. But I pointed out the other day, Proverbs 11 says that a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Fiat money is the false balance of our age. Gold is the honest weight, the real deal that doesn't evaporate when the politicians get nervous. And here's the part they don't want you to notice. The central banks of these countries, the people running the game, are hoarding gold like it's canned food before Y2K. As of May 2025, they're sitting on more than 36,000 tons of gold. For the first time since 1996, they actually hold more gold than they do U.S. treasuries. Gold makes up 20% of global reserves right now. That's bigger than the euro. They've been buying over 1,000 tons of gold a year, and that's a record-setting amount. Nearly half of them admit they're going to buy even more this coming year. And so the translation for that is the House knows the system is rigged, and they're quietly cashing in their chips. So if you don't already have real physical gold in your portfolio, well, you're a little late, but it's not hopeless. Preserve Gold makes it easy. We go over here at Preserve Gold. There we go. They make it easy. If you want coins in your hand, or if you want a fully insured gold IRA, Preserve Gold will walk you through it with zero pressure and no gimmicks. Call Preserve Gold or go to preservegold.com/hotzone, or just skip the small talk. Text Chuck to 50505 right now and grab your free wealth protection guide, because gold is breaking records and the central banks are hoarding it. So don't be the last one that's holding monopoly money. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so thanks to our sponsors there from Preserve Gold. Now, let's talk more about the craziness that's happening with the, as they call it, the selfie flotilla, right? And there's another name for it. They call it the global Sumud. I'm not exactly sure what that stands for or what that is meant to mean, but the global Sumud Flotilla was made up of almost 50 vessels that were carrying 400 to 500 activists. And they attempted to sail to Gaza in order to defy Israel's naval blockade, right? The Israeli Navy intercepted the convoy at sea. They boarded most of the boats. I've got footage of that. So here's the flotilla being intercepted. I'm going to turn the sound down on that because we don't care what it sounds like. This was early in the morning. They were picked off one by one. And then now here they are being brought into port. This is the last of them. This is the last of them being brought into port. Now, before they even intercepted this flotilla, Israel put out many statements saying, we're not going to allow you into the waters off Gaza because Gaza is an active combat zone and you might get shot. And so in order to protect your safety, in order to protect the people of Gaza, and in order to protect the IDF, we can't allow this. We're not going to let you into Gaza. And I'm going to talk in a little bit about just how ridiculous this was anyway, because there's really not any way for them to get the aid ashore. And so they started that. I mean, the flotilla knew without a doubt that the IDF was not going to allow them to come ashore on Gaza. They did not expect in any way to make it to Gaza because they didn't even have a method of getting the aid on shore. You need cranes, you need tenders, you need things like that. They didn't have any of that stuff. And there's no functioning pier in Gaza. There's no port that would fit 50 vessels. And so the people on this thing it started out as a farce. The whole thing has been a farce from start to finish, without a doubt, no question. But that wasn't the reason why they did it. So the Israeli Navy intercepted the convoy at sea as they were entering the Gazan waters, territorial waters, and they boarded most of the boats and then redirected them to Ashdod, which is just north of the Gaza Strip. That's where they've been saying all along. The Israelis have not been against this flotilla bringing aid into the Palestinians in Gaza. They just required them to do it the same way everybody else does it, which is through Israel. Because, and I'll get into this more in depth as well, if Israel didn't do that, there would be a ton of weapons and explosives being delivered to Gaza by sea by vessels from Iran and elsewhere. So they have to inspect the aid before they allow it into Gaza. That's all. But again, this selfie flotilla was much more emphasis on selfie than it was on flotilla. They did not agree to dock at Ashdod and deliver their aid, which was paltry to begin with. It wouldn't have helped much at all. The activists that were on this flotilla, this is the largest one that has ever tried to run the blockade since the blockade was created in what, 2007 or something like that. And it had Greta Thunberg, several European lawmakers were on the boats as well. You probably heard that this flotilla was being escorted by ships from Italy and Spain, and the Spanish, president was all belligerent about it, like, we're going to send our navy down there to make sure the Israelis don't mess with these guys. And when it came down to it, the Spanish and Italian ships split off from the convoy before they got to the Israeli waters, because they knew that if Spanish military ship were to trespass into Israeli waters, the Israelis would be completely justified in blowing it out of the water. And nobody wanted a military confrontation between Israel and Spain. So there you go. They just, all of that everything the Spanish president, everything the Italians and the Greeks all did to act like they were supporting this flotilla was, again, complete political theater. They weren't serious at all. And that's the thing you'll find about most of these activists. They're not serious. They just hate Israel. They're not serious people. And so the reports indicate that Israel used water cannons and stun grenades on some of the boardings. Now, no injuries have been reported. We don't have any evidence of stun grenades and water cannons. You can imagine if that was the case, that there would be lots of video of it out there, but I haven't seen any. So I would say take that with a grain of salt. The activists on these boats have every reason to try to trump up charges against Israel and accuse them of, crimes against humanity and war crimes and all the rest. As a matter of fact, the president of Malaysia, which Malaysia helped fund this flotilla, he came out as soon as this happened and said, this is an absolute war crime and we need to, that he had that statement prepared well in advance. He didn't know what was going to happen or what Israel was going to do, but he knew that they would stop it. So he had this statement prepared to calling it a war crime before any war crime or anything even took place. Now, one vessel apparently got away. Now they're not, they may have captured the last one by now, but the last I saw, there was one vessel they were still looking for that they lost contact with. But Israeli officials say no aid has reached Gaza, and this is the largest flotilla since the infamous one they called the Mavi Marmara incident in 2010. So the fallout, as I said, was immediate. Spain, Ireland, Turkey, South Africa, Colombia, all the usual suspects just lined up, ran for the microphones to condemn Israel. Get this, in Bogota, Colombia, the government went even further. They expelled all the Israeli diplomats from Colombia altogether. And President Petro was saying that they need to get together a, multinational coalition of military, and they need to invade Israel and force them to give their land over to the Palestinians. Yeah, like that's going to happen. Yeah, nice try. So there, of course, across Europe, activists are staging protests. We're seeing protests in Rome, Athens, um, different places in Italy, Berlin. There's been some, Brussels, and they're acting like the flotilla was this noble humanitarian effort and it was crushed by an evil military power. So, in other words, Israel enforces a legal blockade in an active war zone, and somehow the world finds a way to paint the activists as martyrs and Israel as the villain. Now, let's talk about why Israel simply cannot allow these boats to sail into Gaza unchecked. Okay? Before we do that, we got over 25, we got about 2,500 people watching. Folks, let me just remind you to take a moment, and right now we're live. I'll wait, and boop the little like button. Just like this podcast if you're enjoying the content, and that reminds YouTube to show this to lots of other people in their feeds, and it helps the channel grow. Also, if you go over to chuckholton.com, you can find lots of extra stuff. We do monthly phone calls with me and our supporters over there, and we put out a lot of extra content. So please go over there and make sure that you hit the like button. Um, so one of our so Veritas Cupitor says they just killed 2 Jews in England in a synagogue and 3 others were injured. Yeah, in Manchester that happened. Some jihadi stabbed a couple of Jews that were on their way to Yom Kippur services at their synagogue and killed them. And then he himself was taken out by the police. And I keep saying, folks, you're going to see more and more of this. And it's not only going to be uh, against Jews, it's coming for you as well. I have a friend here in Panama, went to dinner with him the other night, and he was telling me he was out riding his bike along the causeway, which is right back here behind me. And a guy rode up behind him, and he was wearing a jersey that had a Star of David on the back of it. His wife is Jewish. And somebody rode up behind him and said, "Aren't you afraid to wear that shirt here in Panama?" And he said, "No, I'm not, but it is getting more and more dangerous and unpopular around the world to express support for Israel. But all that means is that we need to express support for them even more. We need to push back on that and not be afraid. But I'm not one for jewelry. The only piece of jewelry I wear is this wedding ring on my finger. But I'm thinking real hard about getting a T-shirt or a hat or something with a Star of David on it, because we cannot let violence against people be normalized just for the, whatever they're wearing on their head. Just like, MAGA people who wear MAGA hats, walking around on the street getting assaulted. We can't have that. And the only way to really make a difference is to push back on it by just everybody, just flood the zone with the symbols that are causing people's tummies to hurt, and hopefully that'll, put a stop to it. Now, let's talk about why Israel cannot allow these boats to come into Gaza. First of all, weapons smuggling. This blockade was put in place because Gaza has been used to launch rockets, drones, and cross-border attacks like October 7th. Every boat that gets through without inspection is a potential, carrier of contraband. And Israel has a long history of intercepting vessels that are carrying Iranian supplied missiles and explosives that are bound for Hezbollah. Now, I want to kind of detail some of those. And if you want to read them, you can go over to my Telegram channel, And I post this stuff over there on Telegram for people who have Telegram that want to follow this. And the question is, can I find it? Because I want to read you some of these. Let's see here. Back up, back up, back up. Give me just a second. Here we go. So going all the way back to, gosh, how far back does this go? Okay, that's January 2000. Okay, so on January 14, 2002, a boat called the Kareen slipped out of Iran with a Palestinian flag on it, and it was carrying 50 tons of Katyusha rockets, RPGs, mortars, grenades, etc., all bound for Gaza. Yasser Arafat swore it was just paperwork, but Israeli commandos stormed this vessel in the Red Sea and took it over without a shot being fired. And they found proof, and they have pictures of all of the weapons that this found. So again, if you let one boat through like that, that's hundreds of missiles that are going to be aimed at Israel. Now, in 2009, there was another ship called the Victory 5, which sailed off Sudan's coast, carrying sniper scopes and anti-tank gear for the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, headed for Gaza. Israel intercepted it and exposed yet another Iranian-backed arms run. November 4th, 2009, a Cyprus flagged ship named the Frankop sailed from Syria and had another 50 tons of Iranian rockets and stuff for Hamas, and it was smuggled out right under the nose of the United Nations. Israel captured it off Cyprus and seized the weapons. So you could go on and on and on. Every time they do this, it is a violation of the Oslo Accords between Israel and the Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority. And nobody in the press or the media seems to have a problem with that. So again, the threat to Israel is one reason why they can't allow these in. Secondly, the conditions on the ground are not conducive to random flotillas pulling up on shore and delivering aid. Gaza is not a safe place to dock, and sending untrained civilians in yachts and fishing trawlers into an active maritime combat zone is, at the very least, reckless. And so Israel would be wrong in allowing that to happen. Now, third are the logistics of even doing so. Even if the flotilla made it through to Gaza, Gaza has no functioning seaport. The only harbor is a small fishing dock, and that is incapable of handling any cargo. Now, you remember back in 2024 when President Biden attempted to build a temporary floating pier? That was a multi-billion-dollar boondoggle that collapsed within weeks because storms, and to say nothing of the security threats, meant it that the pier kept falling apart. There was at least one troop that was killed and several more that were injured in that boondoggle. Very little aid was actually delivered, and that aid that was delivered was done so at an absolutely stratospheric cost. I think I just figured out on the back of a napkin, probably cost about $1,600 per meal to deliver that stuff over the temporary floating pier. But why did they put in a temporary floating pier? Because there is no way to get that aid ashore if you don't have a pier. I mean, and again, I mentioned that this flotilla would have needed cranes and tenders and longshoresmen and things like that to get the aid on shore, but there isn't any such thing. So again, they knew ahead of time that this was not going to happen. There was no chance of the flotilla delivering that aid the way that they claimed they wanted to do that. Now let's do some math. By conservative estimates, this flotilla cost at least $500,000. And that includes the boats, the fuel, just maintenance and rental or whatever of that of the boats, fuel to get them there, uh, provisions for 500 clowns that are riding on these boats, paying for their satellite phones and Starlinks so that they can broadcast their shenanigans. And if don't forget that there was a very heavily organized PR campaign, and those don't come cheap. And that doesn't even count the cost of the aid that they were carrying itself. So if this flotilla had made it ashore, and let's say Israel just allowed them to go ahead and take it on shore, and somehow there was miraculously appeared a pier where they could dock and offload this stuff, the aid that the flotilla was carrying was negligible. Would have fed a few thousand Palestinians for a few days. That's really about it. But the money that the flotilla spent to bring those few drops of aid to the people in Gaza would have bought a tremendous amount of aid. So if they really cared about the people in Gaza, what they would have done is they would have used the money that they spent on this flotilla, and they would have just sent the money to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation so they could buy more aid, and because they already have a distribution network set up. I did the math, and $500,000, which is, again, conservatively what this flotilla cost, would have provided, if you break it down, $50 provides one emergency food parcel, which feeds a family of 5 for a month through the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. So $500,000 would have bought 10,000 family food parcels. That's enough food for 50,000 people. That's an entire city the size of, like Rafah, something like that, for a full month. But instead, these ridiculous clowns on the flotilla just burn that money on fuel and hashtags, while the Palestinians in Gaza ostensibly can continue to suffer. So it's pretty easy to point out. Again, you can just prove it mathematically. This is not politics. This is just arithmetic. That the people on this flotilla did not care about the Palestinians. The only thing they care about is harming Israel. So the point is not aid, it's not relief. The flotilla's purpose was to embarrass Israel on the international stage and stage a floating circus, really, where these activists could live stream their arrests and pose as martyrs and heroes and increase their subscriber base. It would be like Chuck Holton putting out a Speedo calendar for Christmas and saying that I'm doing this for, the to stand in solidarity for the people in Gaza. No, that wouldn't be standing in solidarity with the people in Gaza. That would be attempting to get clicks. And it, might be successful, but but it would definitely get clicks, right? So this was about Greta Thunberg. This was about the activists themselves. This was not about the Palestinians ever in any way, except for embarrassing Israel is a win for the Palestinians. And so let's not ignore the deeper connections here. There's been a lot of research done on the people who organized these, this flotilla and others. And as it turns out, these people have been connected to organizations that are, closeted Hamas kind of, the Hamas supporting organizations. One of those is called the Palestinians Abroad, or Palestinian Conference for Palestinians Abroad. It's PCPA. And Israel identified them a long time ago as being aligned with Hamas. Previous flotillas, like the European campaign to end the siege of Gaza, that happened, I don't know, most recently, have been repeatedly proven to have ties to Hamas. Hamas has operatives who live in Europe, whose job it is to put these, PR campaigns together in order to bolster Hamas's support across the board. Okay? So whether or not Hamas actually cut the checks to pay for this voyage, the DNA of the flotillas has always been connected to Hamas. Now, there's a organization, what's this called? It's an open source intel organization, and I'm trying to read it here. The Mir Amit Intelligence and Terrorism Information Center. It's a part of the Israeli Intelligence Heritage and Commemoration Center. So this certainly is, pro-Israeli. So that, I just want to point that out. So we would expect they're going to report this from an Israeli point of view, but I don't think that's bad. But they put out a report on this, and I can link this in the chat if you want. Let me go down here and put that in the chat for you, so you can go look at it yourself. Just to kind of give you an overview, the flotilla set sail from Barcelona, Spain, with the objective of breaking the blockade of the Gaza Strip. They had no hope, no chance of actually doing so, and they knew that from day one. So again, their whole reasoning of, we're going to take this aid to break the blockade is if we can get one ship through the blockade, then the Israelis will just collapse and they will no longer blockade Gaza, and Gazans will be free to come and go by sea. They'll have boats coming and going. There'll be cruise ships. It'll be great. Everything will go back to normal in Gaza. That's kind of what they were saying. Anybody with 3 brain cells to rub together knows that was a lie from the outset. The groups organizing the flotilla claimed they were independent and had no connection to any government or political party. But among the organizers was the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, which was behind the last flotilla or the one in 2010, the big one in 2010, and some of the other voyages that have happened this year. One of the coalition's leaders is a guy named Zahir Birawi. I know I massacred that name. And this guy's a Hamas activist in Britain, straight up Muslim Brotherhood. People that were participating in this convoy are also linked to Hamas. They're heavy Hamas supporters who have previously expressed support for the terror attacks that happened on October 7th. In this assessment that I'm explaining to you here, it says the organizer's goal, that's the people organizing the flotilla, is to leverage the event to increase Israel's diplomatic isolation and its negative media coverage, and to pressure it to end the war in the Gaza Strip. While the sources of the flotilla's funding are unclear, the involvement of Hamas activists and its supporters, led by Zahir Birawi, indicated the possibility that Hamas external leadership actually helped launch the flotilla as a part of a broad anti-Israel propaganda and incitement campaign. So that makes it pretty clear. Hamas not only wanted this to happen, but actively worked to make it happen and to facilitate and even fund this flotilla. Always follow the money. Always follow the money. Now, the flotilla, ever since they were way out at sea, even close to Europe still, was claiming that Israel was bombing them with drones and that, they were being threatened with attack and that Israel was going to sink their ships, stuff like that. That's part of the reason why the Spanish and Italian ships went to escort them, because they wanted to make sure that there weren't any drones or bombs or anything dropped on these ships, because some of their own people were on the ships. There were, certainly a good number of Spanish activists that were on the boats. There were some Italians on the boats, so that's why they sent these ships. But there's no proof that Israel used drones against them. Some of the videos that they showed that they claimed were drones actually look like where they were firing flares, and they fired a flare and they actually hit their own rigging with the flare, and the flare fell back down onto the deck of the ship and caught the ship on fire. That's what happens when you have a bunch of untrained civilians that are trying to sail across the Mediterranean. So, but if we look at what Israel has actually done, what they actually did is they were very clear from the outset. They haven't changed their tune. They said from day one, we're not going to allow you to dock in Gaza. There's no place for you to dock. But we will allow you to come ashore in Ashkelon, or Ashdod, I'm sorry, which is just right there north of the Gaza Strip. Drop off your aid and we'll make sure it gets to the people of Gaza. Of course, they don't want to do that. So as they were approaching, Israel sent out a radio call to the flotilla explaining, what they could do, encouraging them to come into the port of Ashdod and drop off their aid, etc. Take a listen to they filmed it, so take a listen to this announcement.
This is the Israeli Navy. You are approaching a blockaded zone. If you wish to deliver aid to Gaza, you may do so through the established channels. Please change your course toward the port of Ashdod, where the aid will undergo a security inspection and then be transferred into the Gaza Strip.
So that seems pretty reasonable to me, that they would, give them an out and say, look, if you really care about the people of Gaza, bring your aid ashore in Ashdod and we'll get it to the people in Gaza. Well, that's what ended up happening anyway, because Israel had to board the ships and then take them into the port of Ashdod, and they will unload them and they will confiscate the aid and send it into Gaza. So Israel's being very, reasonable about this. If we look at this thing being intercepted, the boarding party, this is them being intercepted this morning. They have weapons and they need to have weapons, but you'll see they're not like, tackling people or anything like that. They're not being uber violent or anything. These soldiers, they're boarding the ships and they're clearing them out, taking control of the ships, and then moving the ships to the port of Ashdod. Right? That seems pretty reasonable, I think. Now, Greta was arrested, detained. All of the people were. And they let her put her little frog hat on there and give her a jacket to put on. And, they're not, I'm going to replay that just so you can see it. She's got her little Palestinian keffiyeh wrapped around her neck and everything. She's got her hair in. She looks like a 12-year-old. And she's getting exactly what she wants out of this. She gets a sandwich. She gets the selfie. They have the video they put out of her being arrested. And then she gets put on an airplane and sent back home. She gets exactly what she wanted out of this. Somebody said, I wonder if she'll regret all this. I think so. I mean, she's going to end up being an angry, bitter, lonely, older person. You know, when she grows up, she's going to look back on all these causes that she fought for, and she's going to see how, I think, she'll see how ridiculous it really was. But this is her brand. And so she's world famous, recognized around the globe. She's the darling of the left. So she gets a lot out of doing these. And getting arrested is, comes with the territory. That's part of the deal. Now, it would be really great if Israel said, if you break international, if you break our laws by trying to infiltrate Israel by sea in a boat, we will prosecute you in Israeli court and you will go to an Israeli jail. And let Greta cool her heels for 3 or 4 years in an Israeli prison where she'll be well cared for. Israeli prisons are not hellholes like some places would be. There's, a reason why she's not taking a selfie flotilla to Sudan or Somalia or, Congo or Burma or any place like that where there are actual genocides taking place. No, she's not going there because if she survived it, she would end up in a Somali or Sudanese prison, and that's not a comfortable place to go. The only reason that she feels comfortable attacking Israel is because she knows that Israelis are reasonable and will treat her with respect. If she knew that she would go to prison for 5 years, if she did this, she wouldn't do it. So Israel needs to take a tougher stand on this, I think, because if she doesn't, there's just going to be more of it. And as I wrap this up, I just want to point out, I really think that Israel is, even though they did everything right by the book, they confiscated the aid, and they're going to take that aid right to the people in the Palestinian Authority, or I'm sorry, in Gaza, give it to the people in Gaza. So they're being very reasonable about all this. Israel still loses in the court of public opinion. How do we know? Well, because look, Colombia just kicked out all the Israeli diplomats from their embassies. And the international outcry and opprobrium against Israel just keeps getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So Greta knows this is a win. This is a win for the left. It's a win for the Palestinians. And it's a lose for Israel, even though Israel did everything right. So I would expect you would see more of these in the future. Okay, I wanted to get to the questions today. Again, if you have questions, put them in all caps in the chat, and our moderators will add them to my list. Start out here with Jim's Dead Milton asks, can the status of Hezbollah disarmament be a recurring topic? Just suggesting. Yesterday's video was really good. Well, perhaps. Thank you for that compliment, though. Golden Gun says, what is this Trump throw Bibi under the bus thing? Yeah, I'll get to that here in just a second. I want to save that for last. And Rory McPherson says, have you heard about the terror attack in the UK on a Jewish place? Yeah, I mentioned that. William Lovelace says, I thought the flotillas were guarded by the Italian Navy ships. Italian and Spanish Navy ships accompanied them to the dividing line between international waters and Gaza territorial waters, and then they peeled off because they were not going to confront the IDF. They never were, even though they talked a big game. They don't want a confrontation with the IDF. That wouldn't be good for anybody. Okay, so they just did this as political theater. This is very similar to Biden's failed floating pier and many other, the airdrops into Gaza, all that stuff. They're all political theater, just meant to keep the pressure on Israel and make the politicians feel good. PC says, Chuck, now we see the results of UK PM Starmer's anti-Israel policy and attack on a synagogue. Will this ever stop? I think that's a rhetorical question, PC. But obviously it's not going to stop anytime soon. These kinds of events, like this flotilla, they just whip up the fervor of the useful idiots and encourage more people to do violence against Jews and Israelis around the world. So that's why I'm saying Israel, although it did everything reasonable, maybe it's time for them to stop being so reasonable and really start. Now, they had mentioned when this flotilla started that they were going to confiscate the boats that came down and keep them. Now, I don't know whatever happened to that, but I have not heard since they got picked up this morning whether or not that's still a thing. I don't think so. I don't think they are going to actually keep these boats, but they should. They should say, we're going to keep them. We're going to make them into a large artificial reef just offshore of Ashdod for the fishes. We're going to sink them all in a big pile. Or we're going to put them up for auction. We're going to sell off the boats, and we're going to use that money to buy food for the people in Gaza. Something like that. Again, they could still appear magnanimous, but really put some financial cost on the people that are on this flotilla. We're going to charge, they have, we're going to pass a law that if you enter Israel illegally and get detained, that you will be put into a Israeli holding camp or holding cell out in the middle of the Negev desert with no air conditioning until you come up with a fine of $5,000 a person, something like that. And we will use the proceeds of those fines to help the people in Gaza. That's after we pay for the cost of holding you in our camp in the Negev desert. Okay, something like that. So Janie's asking, is there an international law the flotilla can be charged with? No, not really. There's no law against forming a flotilla and sailing them across international waters. Where they're breaking the law is where they try to illegally enter a country that they don't have visas for. So Vivian Brixon says, as of today, how do you think Hamas will respond to the peace plan? They are being pressured heavily to accept it, but I still personally, I don't believe that they will. Because truly, especially because the Hamas leaders who have to accept the plan are not suffering at all. They're in Qatar living large with billions of dollars. So they're not suffering. And all of this is so good for them. Why would they stop this? They don't want the war to stop. They want the war to continue. Mark Jameson says, I have my own thoughts. What is Russia's true motives with Eurasia? We'll have to talk about that on a different live because that's kind of off topic. Connor Murphy says, did you see the leaked documents that the flotilla was tied to Hamas using a shell corporation? Yeah, that's what I talked about that through the PCPA and all that. Maggie says, did you hear Mandela's great nephew was on the flotilla? Yeah, I did hear that. These people are all just trying to boost their numbers on Instagram and stuff. Jack asks, what happened to the boat each time they are deported? They take the boats, they confiscate the boats, and then they release them back to the boat's owners who then can sail them away and try again next time. They should just keep them for good. They should just say that these are ours now. Ben Dobson said, did Trump just commit to protect Qatar militarily? Yeah, I'll talk about that in just a minute. Derek Wilson says, please do another live about possible escalation with Russia. Okay, I will. Jason Harris says, when do you think the Ukraine war is going to end? It'll probably be more than a year. But a lot of it depends on what decisions NATO makes and what decisions the United States makes. Gigabyte says, flotilla connected to a Hamas supporter in Spain. Yeah, we talked about that. Connor Murphy says, did you hear Estonia is ready to host British F-35s with nuclear capability after its airspace was violated? Yes, I saw that, and we're actually sending some. And I saw the first F-35 shoot down of a Russian drone took place over the last few days. Rev Ren says, can they arrest these clowns on these boats and jail them? They can if they want, and they should. Lori W says, will you do a special live on October 7th? Yes, I will. Jeannie G says, how come Spain and Italy changed their mind about escorting the flotilla to Gaza? Well, they didn't change their mind. They never intended to come all the way to the shore of Gaza. They just didn't say that at the outset. Broski Bear says, would you consider doing a video on the persecution of Christians around the globe, Syria, Nigeria, Europe, USA? Sure. That'd be a good one to do, actually. And thank you, Nicholas Menega. I appreciate that. Skyleg says, go look who owns some of the boats. They're connected to Qatar. Yes, I believe that's true. Country Boy 316 says, why not send America to turn the boats around and back to Spain instead of letting them give Israel a bad image? If I was president, I would probably do something like that. I wouldn't be averse to that. Bruce MacArthur says, why are you accepting money from Israel for your posts? I wish. Israel is not paying me anything. Trust me. This is all self-funded and funded by viewers like you. So Bruce, go become a supporter, and I can continue doing this. I love it when people with zero proof whatsoever claim that I'm accepting money from Israel or from Ukraine or from, whatever. It's like it's like a self-own. You're just making yourself look ridiculous, right? Maydell Holding says, why doesn't Israel just let them loose in Gaza? Whatever happens, happens. That wouldn't be a real bad idea. Maybe Israel should just say, all right, if you want to take a bunch of ships into Gaza, go right ahead. But they'd have to do it the last minute. They'd have to say all along, no, we're going to stop these ships. We're going to board them. We're going to confiscate them. We're going to search them. We're not going to allow them in. And then right at the last minute, when they get up to the line, say, we changed our mind. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Get the aid off. And just make them look as ridiculous as they are when they float up to the beach in Gaza and they can't get their aid ashore because they don't have any cranes or a pier or anything. That would be sweet. That would be probably the smartest thing Israel could do. That's 4D chess right there, Maydell. Good idea. And then I guarantee you they wouldn't stay, but just say, hey, once they get they get to the shore of Gaza, then Israel could come in and say, we're confiscating these boats and kicking you guys off. You can do whatever you want, but you're in Gaza now, so have fun. And let these people just live in Gaza for a while. The only problem with that is that some of them might get killed. Of course, Israel would be blamed for that, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it would be a really bright idea for Israel to change their minds last minute. And why the reason I say last minute is so that these guys believe they're going to get picked up the entire time. So they're not going to try bringing in grenades and rocket launchers and weapons. Because if you told them from the outset, okay, the next flotilla that comes in here, we're just going to let it through, I can guarantee you that flotilla would be full of contraband. So they have to at least give the impression that they're not going to allow it on shore up until the last minute. But then if they did let it through, that'd be sweet, because then they'd motor right up to the beach and they'd be like, yeah, we don't have any way of getting this stuff on the beach, and there's bullets flying everywhere, and what are we going to do? And there's zombie hordes of Palestinians swimming out to try to get on our boats now. Are we going to deny them, or are we going to let them swamp our boats because they get so many Palestinians on our boats that they sink? That it would just be a great way to turn that dilemma right on its head. I don't think the Israelis have quite that much chutzpah, but I wish they did. If you're Israeli, what do you think about that? Would you be in favor of doing something like that? It'd be a risk, but I think it would be beautiful. And Israel should have boats in the water very close with camera crews like me filming, enabling journalists to film all of this as the flotilla comes up to the shore and they can't get their aid ashore, and there are Palestinians swimming out and trying to get on the boats, and they're trying, like, do we kick them off? Do we let them on? If we let them on, they're going to sink our boat. If we kick them off, we look like, the idiots we are. It would be so great. That's excellent. So I'm gonna pass that along to the powers that be in Israel and say, here's what you need to do next time. See if they've got the guts to do it. Karen Gaestra says, what version of the Bible do you recommend? Just real quick, I normally read the ESV version, English Standard Version, but I read several different versions from time to time. The best version is the one that you will actually read. Okay? Lily's Garden says, if you have the best military in the world, why haven't you stormed places and got the hostages? Well, folks, that is actually, I don't know if you're talking about Israel, if you're talking about the United States. Israel could, you could have the strongest military in the world, but if Hamas has got agents right next to the hostages with guns to their heads, you're probably not going to be able to get the hostages out alive. Doesn't matter how good you are. It's an impossibility. You've got to negotiate them out or find a way to distract the guys that are tasked with executing the hostages. And it's not that easy. Gary Blanton says, how can the IDF eliminate Hamas without killing the hostages? That is a dilemma. They probably can't. The short answer is they probably can't. Now, I wanted to answer the question that was posed by Nicholas Manega. What is the story with Israel hits a hospital twice, killing reporters and responders? I don't know what to believe. So that was a legitimate military target. Hamas was using it as a headquarters, as a place to meet, and they were using it to surveil Israeli troops, which put Israeli troops at direct risk. So they were justified in striking the hospital. I did a whole live on this, so you can go back to when that happened. You can watch that live. I explained it in great detail. But yeah, that's happening. So, all right. So the flotilla is now the last boats of the flotilla. This is shot at the port in Ashdod. They're being escorted in by Israeli Navy ships. And this sad and ridiculous group of activists is going to get fed, and then they're going to get put on planes and deported. Again, they could say, if you've been deported from Israel before and you come back to Israel again illegally, you're going to jail for 5 years, something like that. That would be another thing they could do to finish this. Now, I want to talk before we go about President Trump throwing Israel under the bus, especially Bibi Netanyahu. As you know, a couple weeks ago, the Israelis struck Qatar attempted to kill the leadership of Hamas, these billionaires that are the ones making the decisions whether or not to end the war. But they're not getting any of the suffering or anything of this war. So they're not bearing the cost at all. They're actually benefiting from this war. And so it's not likely that they're going to negotiate in good faith. Israel's tried for years. And so they dropped a bomb on the place where they were meeting. Now, it turns out they missed some of the most important leaders, but they did kill a few. And of course, Qatar was very upset by this. And Israel at the first was saying, well, if you have a problem with it, then maybe don't host Hamas. And then we won't need to do it. Or you take them out yourselves and kick them out. Now, President Trump just secured a deal with the Qataris for more than $1 trillion of investment, foreign direct investment in the United States. And so Qatar was obviously very upset by the strike on their country. And they started referring to Israel as the enemy, which is something they hadn't done. Plus, they pulled out of the peace negotiations, said we're not going to mediate peace negotiations anymore. President Trump is still banging the drum to try to get a peace deal. As unlikely as that is, he wanted the Qataris to be involved with the mediation because the Hamas leadership will not speak directly to the United States or Israel. It has to be shuttle diplomacy. So President Trump was like, look, my Nobel Peace Prize is in jeopardy here. So when he met with Bibi Netanyahu in the Oval Office last week, he very strongly pressured Netanyahu to apologize to Qatar for striking their country. And Netanyahu went along with it. There wasn't a lot of cost in terms of, it's not like it's going to make anybody hate him anymore. It's not going to. He did the value calculation there and said, the Israelis are going to get more value out of this if I apologize than if I don't. So he said, okay, and he picked up the phone. He called the emirs in Qatar and apologized, not for the strike, tellingly. He apologized for one Qatari security guard who was killed in the strike. Sorry, we did not mean to kill that security guard. President Trump then went on to sign an executive order yesterday that agreed to some security guarantees with Qatar. Basically said if anybody attacks Qatar again, the United States will consider it an attack on us, and we will respond accordingly. Now, obviously, that wasn't aimed at Sri Lanka. It wasn't aimed at Russia. That the reason for that executive order was because of Israel and what Israel had done. And it did, look, when Israel did that, it did put the United States in a bit of a tough spot because we've got thousands of U.S. troops at a base in Qatar. Qatar is hosting those troops, and we want to keep that base. So I'm sure there were some backroom negotiations that were happening between Qatar and the United States. And so the U.S. was like, okay, we will, we will put forward these security guarantees for Qatar to ensure that Israel keeps its word and doesn't strike Qatar again. Now, that wasn't necessary. The United States could have simply told Israel, look, please don't strike Qatar again. And Israel would have said, okay, and that would have been it. But that's what happened. And I just want to say this, why I think this is a little bit gross on the part of the Trump administration. Why the Trump administration would do this, because whether or not this is true, I'm trying to be very careful how I say this because people get really upset if you criticize Trump for any reason. I'm not afraid to criticize Trump if he does something I think is gross. And I think this is gross because whether or not this is the case, it makes it look like the Trump administration is in the pocket of Qatar. Makes it look like Qatar made a phone call to President Trump and said, we're not going to invest our $1.1 trillion in the United States if you don't make a phone call to Bibi and tell him not to do that anymore. And Trump, not wanting to lose that foreign direct investment, said, okay. And it makes it look like Trump is a shill for Qatar, whether or not he is. So I don't know if he is or not, but it's not a good look. And so I think that's just unfortunate. Now, in the greater scheme of things, it doesn't change much. Israel probably was not planning to strike Qatar again. And tellingly, one thing Israel did not promise was that they wouldn't strike Hamas in Qatar. So they just basically promised they're not going to bomb Qatar anymore. And it's not out of the realm of possibility that the Hamas leadership that's in Qatar might have an unfortunate accident where their bed just suddenly spontaneously combusts one night, or the electronic device, when they go to pick up the remote for the TV and push the button, the remote blows up and takes them out. I mean, there's stranger things have happened. Things malfunction all the time. And Israel's pretty good at making them malfunction. So Israel didn't constrain itself as much as it sounds. And so either this was just more ridiculous political theater, or it was President Trump actually being in the pocket of the Qataris. And I hope not. I hope not. But it's not a good look either way. All right, folks, that is all I've got for today. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on. 3,000 people watching. Please make sure you're subscribed to this podcast and you can get notified before we go live. And that way you can make sure not to miss any of the live broadcasts I do every business day and sometimes twice a day, depending on if there's breaking news. We put out a lot more content on our channel. Make sure you check out some of the other videos that we have besides the lives over there. And I have a new YouTube channel that's linked in the description of this video, where I'm just putting up nice, beautiful walks and sunsets and drone shots and beautiful things that I see in the places that I go around the globe that don't make it into the news. And it would be a personal favor to me if you'd go take a look at that and subscribe to that channel, because I'm trying to get the number of subscribers up. So thank you very much for watching. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.